Thank you, Your Honour. We have Vice Admiral Griggs.
Vice Admiral, you need to be sworn. Will you take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
Oath, Your Honour.
Oath. With the Bible there, take it in your hand and stand for me, please. And repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission.
That the evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Take a seat.
Thank you, Your Honour. Would you tell the Royal Commission your full name?
Raymond James Griggs.
And your position?
Vice Chief of the Australian Defence Force.
Thank you. You provided a statement dated the 14th of February 2017.
I did.
Have you got a copy of that with you?
I do.
The contents of that are true and correct?
They are.
Thank you. I tender that.
The Exhibit 51.3.
Now, Vice Admiral, you gave evidence in case study 40 that took place between June and August 2016.
I did.
And you also, I think, provided a statement to the Royal Commission then.
I did.
And the Commonwealth made 4 sets of submissions following that hearing. That's right?
Correct.
And you're familiar with, I take it, those submissions?
The elements of those relating to defence, yes.
Thank you. Now, those hearings completed in August 2015, and there has been no report published in relation to that case study. However, I take it from the evidence given by you and others and the submissions that you and others have made that you have come to a position where you've learnt lessons from what was exposed during that hearing and in the submissions. Is that right?
Absolutely, and I think case study 40 acted as a very important catalyst for change in the organisation.
What lessons have you learned from that case study?
Well, I think what we learn is something that we, particularly in relation to cadets, and I'll sort of focus on that if I may, because it's the contemporary piece for us. We had for some time been trying to bring the cadet organisation together rather than the 3 individual cadet services.
Perhaps you just might explain those services.
So there's the Australian Naval Cadets, the Air Force Cadets and the Army Cadets, and they have largely operated independently under the oversight of the chief of that particular service. There have been a couple of attempts to put top-level policy in place from a central perspective, and as I gave evidence in June, on the 1st of July we had changes to the Defence Act, which changed the fundamental command arrangements within the ADF.
That's 1st of July
2016.
Thank you.
And it gave the Chief of Defence Force full command of the ADF and established me formally as his deputy, and one of the responsibilities given to me was for youth safety policy and a common approach to that. As a result of the case study, we went back and frankly seized the moment in terms of this long-term goal to bring and reform the cadet organisations and bring it into a much stronger central control, particularly from a general policy sense, but particularly around child safety, and that's what we've done. We took a proposal in October of 2016 to the Chiefs of Service Committee, which is the senior military committee within the ADF, and embarked on what we've called the One Cadet reform process. And on the 1st of February this year, we established for the first time a ADF headquarters, cadet headquarters, where we have tried to blend the very important need for the single cadet services to keep their service identity, because that's what attracts children and youth to it. But to have this much stronger central control, and we've done that using some models that we had implemented in other parts of the organisation, where what we would call the joint nature of the business is important, but also the single service piece is important. And we've used the model that we have in Joint Health Command, where each of the single service Director Generals of Cadets work both to me and to the service chief. But they're very clearly defined what their responsibilities to me are, and they are largely around implementing the common policy aspects of cadet policy, and of course the biggest component of that is the child safety piece.
Is the
Child safety piece.
Thank you. Can I take you, Vice Admiral, through the work that you've done on the basis of a chronology, which is, I think, effectively what your statement set out. But if we can have in front of us at the same time the last page of your statement, which is the Defence Youth Safety Framework. Perhaps if we could have that up on the screen to one side while I ask you various questions about the component parts. Not sure if the Commissioners have that. It's behind Vice Admiral's statement. Yes. Now, the first activity that you were involved in after the evidence was completed was to begin the One Cadet model. Is that right?
So, the first thing I did was, I think it was on the 7th of July, I sent a letter to each officer of cadets and instructor of cadets, all the volunteer staff, basically summarising what we had taken away from case study 40, with three particular points of emphasis.
Perhaps we might have that. I think that's tab 55. We'll have that up on the screen. This is the directive you're referring to?
No, that's the directive which was sent the same day. But
well, perhaps 56, I think, might be the next one, tab 56. So that's the one you're referring to?
Yeah.
Now, continue.
Yeah, so the aim of this letter was, it was unusual, it's very unusual to write to, from outside the particular cadet service to all the instructors, but I cleared that with the service chiefs. They were very supportive of it, but we thought it was really important to try and give them a sense of what had happened at the Royal Commission, what the key issues that emerged from it that related to them, and of course for me that was the special care issue, age of consent, and the anomalies in a lot of our documentation and training that were exposed during case study 40 around age of consent.
Just start with that. What was the issue with age of consent?
Well, there was material that was just plain wrong in our documentation.
And that it put it at much lower than...
It was either just incorrect or put it at a lower age. And there was mention of as low as 14 was mentioned in certain documents and training materials. So
the various policies and procedures that refer to age of consent now refer to the ACRIT provision in each state?
Yes. So, do you want to get to that later, or
no? Just confirm that that's the case.
That's my understanding now. Is that we've gone through all the material, and the directive basically was the basis for fixing up all the material that was incorrect.
And secondly, you referred to the special care provisions. Tell us what they are.
Well, the special care provisions for sexual interaction between adults and those under care, regardless of whether they've reached the age of consent or not. So that was something that was not covered, frankly, at all in any of our documentation. It was alluded to in one document, but that was about it. And we felt that was really important to emphasise that directly to the instructors and officers of cadets, which is why the letter was sent to them personally.
Why did that come up as an issue in the hearing?
Well, the Commission raised the issue, and we did a look through our documentation and we couldn't find it. It was in relation to a cadet case in particular.
Well, tell us about the cadet case in particular.
It was a case where an adult instructor of cadets had entered into a relationship with a cadet who was above the age of consent but under 18.
And the effect was that neither of those two parties were aware that there was provisions in legislation that meant that that relationship was effectively unlawful.
I think that is the nub of it, yes.
And so what you've done is, in the relevant policies and procedures, you've made that very clear so that those who are the intended readers of those policies know of that provision in the respective states. Is that right? And
that's primarily first of all, through that letter, and secondly, through the directive, which was to tide us over as we went through a significant amount of policy and procedures and training material that we had to make sure we got all the inaccuracies out of that material and make sure that the special care provisions were clearly articulated.
A related issue was whether or not the ADF in relation to cadets had a no-blame approach.
And that's the third element of the letter. So the three was age of consent, special care and no blame. And as I said...
Explain what the situation was before you sent this letter in relation to the no-blame approach.
I think there was very clear evidence presented in the case study that there historically may have been a view by some that the victim in these cases was in some way held to have some responsibility for it. So we wanted to be very clear about that and make sure that it was unequivocal, that no victim, no child can be in any way held account or be responsible for something like that when it occurs.
Now, you dealt with that via this letter?
Both via the letter and the directive.
And how else did you deal with it in order to inculcate those in the cadets that that was and should be the approach of them?
So what we have tried to do is make sure that that is now in induction packages, in training material. We have a big period in January over the school holidays where there's a number of cadet camps around the country. Senior people went out and spoke at the start of those camps. We got the camp leaders to emphasise again the three main points out of the case study. So it's a continual banging of the drum. I think that's what we've got to keep doing until it is well and truly understood across the organisation, given that we are talking about an organisation of around 27,000 people.
Now, in addition to those three matters which you've raised, a theme throughout the evidence and the submissions was the duplication of policies and the unnecessary, perhaps, length and complexity of policies. That was right?
Absolutely right.
Now, in terms of the matters that you have put in place in response to the case study, and in particular that matter, can I start with the one cadet model? Now, the purpose of that model was, as you say, to combine each of the three service entities into one structural hierarchy, is that right?
Not quite, because, as I said, it's a matter of balancing the need for individual identity of those cadet services, and the service chief, the Chief of Army, Navy and Air Force, has a legitimate role in the administration and running of those three services. But it was to make sure that the top-level policy piece had some real bite. Now, I'd previously, in this position, had previously had responsibility for policy, but prior to the changes to the Defence Act on the 1st of July last year, the ability to enforce some of that was questionable.
And that was provided by the amendment you
That's correct.
discussed earlier.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So that now gives the Vice Chief very clear authority. And of course, you know, even that directive that I sent on the 7th of July, frankly, if I'd sent that in May, the response to that directive in May versus a response in July could well have been very different if individuals have chosen to interpret it the way they wanted to.
Do you effectively mean that if it had been sent before the hearing, they would have disregarded it?
No, not disregarded it, but it's about just the acceptance of the authority, which was now crystal clear in legislation.
Now, on your diagram, you have one cadet sitting underneath governance systems and processes. Do you see that there?
Yes. Well, in effect, it's a reform package, but it's largely about the governance of the common policy elements that go across all three of the cadet organisations, and that's where the duplication was causing problems. So
because each had their own, is that what you mean?
Each had their own. In fact, in December we finished mapping all the elements, not just the child safety part, but all the elements of policy across the three, so that we knew where to start in terms of thinning it all out and moving towards a single set of common policies and procedures. And so that work is proceeding, mainly because we spent the time mapping in some detail, and I can provide that to the Commission, which just a one-page diagram which shows the amount of duplication that there was, if you would like that.
Certainly. Now, the heading of this is the Defence Youth Safety Framework, and I think you've said in your statement that all authoritative information on child safety is contained within that framework. Is that right?
Yes.
And the way in which you've dealt with duplication, as you've said, firstly, there was the three different services. What other areas of duplication have been removed by this framework?
Well, the duplication is largely in policy procedures and manuals. So that's why we need to do the mapping activity, so we could start that process of working out what we needed to keep, what was clearly common, what isn't common, what specific things still need to be in place. Air Force cadets, their aviation component in their training, for example, needs to.
And that's an ongoing process.
It's an ongoing process. Mm-hmm. But my point in relation to child safety would be, I don't believe there is anything that isn't common.
Isn't common.
I only want one set of documents around child safety.
Now, you engaged Ernst & Young and Bravehearts shortly after the hearing.
I think we had already engaged them before the hearing for development of our youth safety training package.
Did their task change after the hearing?
The pace of their task changed after the hearing.
So can you explain precisely what their role was?
Well, they're assisting us in the development of the training packages. So when we came to the hearing, there was at the level 1, the first of the packages had been developed, but it had been actually developed for the rest of the Defence Organisation, not the cadet organisation, because the cadets had the SCAP training program. After the hearing, what we did was we went back and looked at the level 1 training and realised that it didn't pick up in enough depth the 3 main elements out of the case study. We revised that package and it was released not only to the rest of the Defence Organisation but to the cadets at the end of October last year.
And so what this diagram tells us, that level 1 training's being delivered and level 2 to 7 remains to be delivered.
No, they're under development.
I'm sorry?
And their delivery dates are as indicated in the boxes. So the next package of training was going to be delivered in June. I brought that forward with a no later date than the end of March, and I anticipate that it'll actually be delivered on the 14th of March. And the importance of that package is that it will allow us to retire the SCAP training, which we talked about during the case study, and I was quite forthcoming in saying that I didn't think it covered what it needed to. So with the combination of level 1 and 2, we will be able to retire the SCAP training. The level 1 training, I completed that last week, because as I did for SCAP before I appeared for the case study 40, so I could actually get a feel for the quality of the content. And I was very happy with the quality of the content in the level 1 training. It certainly picks up the 3 main elements out of the case study. It's a little long, but we'll continue to refine that. Because one of the things that we are really focused on is making sure that this training resonates with people who do it, and I don't want it to become a mechanical tick-in-the-box activity. That's the last thing we need.
So the content of that training has been derived, at least in part, from Braveheart's work?
Absolutely.
Now, you referred to SCAP, that's Safeguarding Children Awareness Package, is that right?
I think that's what it stands for, yes.
And has the content of this training been determined? It is only the delivery is yet to come?
In terms of the different levels?
Yes.
I think, by and large, the construct has been determined in conjunction with Bravehearts and Ernst & Young. What we've been doing is doing some workshops so that we can make sure that the scenario or situational piece of the training is relevant in the cadet context rather than just being a generic context.
You refer to Youth Poll Man under the Governance Systems and Processes, which I assume is the Youth Policy Manual.
Youth Policy Manual, that's correct.
It's referred to as an administrative policy. From the material you provided, the impression is that it also had a role to play in policy in other areas relating to child protection. Is that not right?
It's split into 2 parts. So the first part is more general in relation to youth safety across defence. So covering things like the Young Endeavour Youth Scheme, the Work Experience Program, activities like that, which are not cadet related. So the general policy around youth safety is in part 1 of the book. Part 2 is focused on the cadets.
And focused on the cadets in relation to child protection, or does that appear somewhere else?
No, the child protection piece, the youth safety chapter was published in October of 2016, following the hearing.
So is it the case that if one was to look for where your child safety and child protection procedures and approach was, you'd look in Youth Poll Man?
In both parts. In general terms in part 1, but more detailed content around cadets in part 2.
And so by reference to the implementation resources, I don't quite understand how that fits in with the youth poleman, which contains the matters that relate to child protection and safety.
Because that's a policy manual, so the implementation of resources is around standard operating procedures and protocols. It's around fact sheets and guides, so we've been very keen to try and make the policy pronouncement very implementable and practical at the coalface. So we don't necessarily want an instructor of cadets to be wading through Youth Poleman if we have a range of material that is accurately linked back to Youth Poleman, but written in a way that is practical and implementable.
So the implementation resources presumably widely available through your intranet or something similar?
That's correct.
Now, you had a sexual misconduct prevention and response office prior to the hearing that operated?
Yes.
That's right. And then, as I understand, since the hearing, you've sought to extend that?
We have. We started a 12-month trial on the 31st of October last year to broaden it out and include cadets, officers of cadets, instructors of cadets and families. So previously the SEMPRO, as it's known, did not encompass the cadet population.
So that's the exchange that's under trial at the moment?
That's right.
Why didn't it include cadets?
I think because it was established following the Skype incident at ADFA in 2012, I think it was, and the focus was on the ADF at the time rather than on cadets.
So the Skype incident that you refer to, which I think was well publicised at the time, didn't refer to people at the age of cadets?
No, that wasn't the central issue in Skype.
Thank you. Now, another issue in the hearing, as I understand it, was fraternisation. Do you understand what I mean by that?
I do.
How do you understand it to have come about as an issue in the hearing?
I'm just trying to think back in the cadet sense. I think one of the things that I certainly said was that our people understood that there was a no fraternisation policy, but it was not always applied.
So what is the no fraternisation policy?
Well, it comes under our unacceptable behaviour policy around
Fraternising between whom?
Well, this is where it gets complicated because what is fraternisation in one part of the organisation when it comes to cadets? It's not fraternisation. It's criminal activity. And it's abuse. So I think that was part of the issue, was making sure that was clearly articulated.
How have you clearly articulated it?
Well, mainly through reinforcing those three components out of the case study.
Well, you might just have to help us a bit more.
Sure.
You said there was some, this is my word, not yours, confusion between what was clearly unlawful behaviour and what wasn't, and you sought to articulate the differences for your
Well, it's very
cadets.
simple in the cadet area because it's not fraternisation.
It's unlawful.
It's unlawful if it has a sexual dimension.
But by fraternisation, you're meaning between an adult and a child or some other people?
Well, the problem with fraternisation as a term is it encompasses everything. So it can apply between two cadets, it can apply between two adults, but it's about the boundary that is where we're into abuse and criminal activity.
So is there any room for the concept of fraternisation in relation to cadets and a sexual relationship between a cadet and somebody older than 18?
No.
There isn't? Is there any other room for fraternisation as a concept between anyone else who's part of cadets?
Well, no, I mean, our general position is that we don't encourage or support or accept fraternisation.
And you've explained that to people in much the same way as you've explained the other three issues.
Well, I think that has always been well explained, but the point I'm trying to make is I think people have confused no fraternisation with crossing the boundary. Some people saw it as fraternisation rather than criminal behaviour. That's the point I'm trying to make.
So when you say that people have confused no fraternisation with crossing the boundary, I'm not sure what you mean.
So what I'm trying to say is that fraternisation is a more general concept.
That describes what?
It can describe anything from signs of affection.
Between who?
Between anybody.
Within the force?
Yes.
Regardless of age?
Regardless of age. So it's a very broad, from a definitional perspective, it's very broad. And what we're trying to do is make it very clear that what we heard about in the case study was not fraternisation. It was abuse and a criminal activity.
In terms of the policy, leaving aside what happened in the case study of no fraternisation, that's a different concept than one that involves a child. Is that right?
Can you say that again?
Certainly. You said there was a no fraternisation policy. Is that right?
That's right.
And there is criminal behaviour in relation to, for relevant purposes, a child and an adult. That's right?
Yep.
And is there anything else that you would describe fraternisation that involved a child other than what I've described to you?
With an adult?
With anyone?
You could have a circumstance where cadets cadets between themselves under the age of 18 show signs of, potential intimacy. That would be considered fraternisation.
And that would be something that the Defence Force would seek to have not happen.
Correct.
Is that right? Thank you. Now, on your diagram, you've got a heading of youth safety assurance and another one of youth safe people practices. Do you see those two?
Yes.
How do they fit together?
Well, the youth safe people practices is really about providing guidance on those particular topics. Suitability screening, including working with children checks, code of conduct. If you're going to have a code of conduct, it must have these following elements in relation to child safety. So there's a code of conduct guides. Now, that's not specifically around cadets. It's also around the Young and Dev Youth Scheme, work employment programs, things like that. So that is setting some guidelines. The youth safety assurance piece is probably, in my mind, it is the central part of our work at the moment in terms of making sure that what we put in place endures. Because as I think I was asked back in June, how do we know that this isn't just you appearing and saying it's going to happen and then you disappear? This is my answer to that. The assurance piece is absolutely crucial. So we have developed a set of youth safety standards, which is based on the creating child safe institutions work. Along with that, we have a maturity model which has been developed so we can understand where a particular part of the organisation is in terms of youth safety maturity. We then have a a cycle where we systematically go through the organisation to do checks and spot checks. And that's built around the status assessment, which is that fourth box. Now, the status assessment pilot is being run. It started on the 1st of March. We've done two units already over the weekend. We have another 16 to go in the pilot. And that's why all those dates are the 28th of April, because we want to run the pilot, see how, and the pilot status assessment uses the draft safety standards and the maturity model, and we want to see how that pans out, see if it's workable, it's not too cumbersome, and then once we get feedback from that status assessment pilot program, which is 18 units around the country of all three different cadet services, both regional and city. So we're trying to mix it up so we don't just get, one view. And then we will, following that pilot program, our plan is to implement those on the 28th of April. I think that's a really important part of what we're trying to do.
If I was a 17-year-old cadet and I wanted to report that a cadet instructor over 20 had made me feel uncomfortable in a sexual approach, on the basis of this framework, how do I know what to do?
There is an incident. There's an incident management guide which gives the broad approaches, and that is then.
I'm sorry. How do I find that document?
That is
as a 17-year-old Vice Admiral.
Well, as a 17-year-old, you're not going to read that. What you are going to have is training material, either as you join or annual awareness training. That's where you'll get that information.
But what will that training tell me? Assume I've been trained, I'm 17. What do I do by reference to this framework if I want to tell someone what's happened to me?
They're encouraged to tell either a trusted adult or a family member if that's appropriate. And now with and obviously they're the primary means. But now with the SEMPRO support that's available, there is a range of material that has been distributed to all cadet units, and again I can tend to that if you'd like to see that.
No, it's more I want to know what tells me what I do. I understand you said I'll be trained to know, but assuming I've got the training on board, where do I know where to go in the Defence Force, leaving aside my family for the moment?
Well, the guidance is to go to a trusted adult within the unit. Within the unit. Or, if that's not possible, that's why the SEMPRO piece is very important, because it's an external vehicle for the cadet to find someone who will listen and take action.
And I know about SEMPRO because I've been told in training?
You've been told in training, and there will be posters, and as part of the things I can give you to look at, that have been distributed to all cadet units.
So what's the expectation of what will happen when I go to SEMPRO?
In terms of...
well, I'm here with a complaint. What's going to happen? What's
going to happen is that you'll be able to tell your story with some confidence that no one in that SEMPRO organisation is conflicted. And that's often the problem at the unit level, of course, is who is a trusted adult. That's obviously a challenge for young people sometimes to determine. And at least with the SEMPRO piece, it is an independent vehicle for someone to be able to take the story and take action on it.
Well, and what do I understand as a 17-year-old, what SEMPRO can do with my complaint?
Well, it will involve reporting it to the appropriate authorities, whether that's police or into the cadet organisation.
So SEMPRO, the person responsible at SEMPRO, is required to report to who?
It will depend on the nature of the call.
Well, the complaint I have is that someone more senior to me in the cadets has done something that makes me feel uncomfortable by way of making a sexual approach. That's what the complaint.
Yep, then it will be reported into the ADF Cadet Headquarters.
And SEMPRO knows how to do that because of what policy on your framework?
Well, that is what SEMPRO does, Council.
So they know that through their own processes, do they? So
They-
SEMPRO
they-
reports to, who did you say?
It'll go into the ADF Cadet Headquarters.
So who's responsible for it in headquarters?
Well, I don't have the exact individual's position.
So what policy here in the framework would tell me, who wanted to know what was going to happen to my complaint, what was going to happen?
The material that has been prepared to be and has been distributed has that information.
No, I understand that, but where would I find that on your framework? Is it in the fact sheets, the guides, the workshops?
Yes, it's in the guide. It's in the implementation resources.
And so under there, I would know what was going to happen to my complaint.
Yes.
Is that right? And in terms of the options available to Defence Force as to my complaint, where would I find what might happen and what's available to happen?
Options available in what sense?
Well, I've made a complaint. SEMPRO's reported it to somebody in headquarters. What tells me what headquarters might do with my complaint of these materials?
It's again in the implementation resources.
That will tell me.
Yes.
And so what will it tell me that could happen to my complaint after it got to headquarters?
I don't have the exact detail, but in broad terms, it will be that someone will contact you and provide support. I mean, the difference between SEMPRO and the cadet world and the rest of Defence is for the broader defence community, we have a restricted reporting regime where the victim can opt not to pursue a matter, just so they can get immediate support following an incident. Because of the fact that we're dealing with children, that restricted reporting option is not available in relation to cadets, so that they can't make a restricted disclosure, and they know that the report that they make will be reported if it's appropriate or necessary to civil police or to the chain of command.
And or to the chain of command.
Chain of command through the ADF headquarters, through the cadet headquarters.
Who should I expect to investigate my complaint?
At the moment, that will be appointed by the cadet organisation. What we're trying to do as part of our ongoing work is looking for best practice models. We believe the Navy Cadets Fairness and Resolution Agency is a best practice in relation to having trained people to come and do investigations, and our intention is to roll that out across the whole cadet organisation.
So if I'm a Navy cadet, is my expectation going to be that the Navy Cadets Fairness and Resolution Agency will look at my complaint?
If it depends on the level of complaint, but yes, that's the general model.
More serious it looks at, or less serious?
More serious.
And can I expect that that agency will investigate my complaint?
Yes.
And speak with me as part of that investigation?
Yes.
And what powers does that agency have once it's investigated?
They have they conduct what's called a general inquiry, and can make recommendations to the back to the chain of command, basically.
So the chain of command over me, is that what chain of command you're talking about?
Well, it depends. Again, it depends on the circumstances of the complaint.
Well, the complaint is, as I've indicated.
Yes, but it would then go. It will go to a higher part of the chain of command than the individual unit.
In the individual unit?
No, higher than the individual unit. So in a Navy Cadet example, it would go to the flotilla level, which is the higher headquarters. So there's no point of going straight to the unit itself.
And that person will be empowered to make a decision about what to do with my complaint?
Yes.
And where in this framework will I find that process?
It's probably covered in. It's in the Incident Management Guide, which is.
Where's that?
Again, part of the implementation resources. There's an Incident Management Guide.
It's part of the implementation resources,
Yes.
is it? So am I right in understanding that this safety framework includes the cadets in particular, but also more generally other people described as youth within the organisation?
That's correct.
Thank you. Now, you've referred to achieving cultural reform, and one aspect is clearly doing the work you've described with training and putting in place practices and procedures. What else do you think is going to be necessary to achieve that cultural reform?
Sustained, focused leadership.
How do you show your leadership, Vice Admiral?
Well, it's not just me, it's sustained, focused leadership throughout the organisation.
But in relation to you, how do you show it?
How do I show it? Well, I think the letter that I wrote in July was very much part of that, trying to put my stamp on what was coming. And if you read the letter, it talks about there is change, significant change coming, and I need you to be on board with that. I will be writing a similar letter after this case study to reflect again on the fact that this matter is not something that just came and went in June last year. My own role in making sure that the One Cadet reform process goes through to completion is another part of this. I mean, it was my personal involvement in preparing the reform package that went to the Chiefs of Service Committee was significant, and I continue to drive that process and driving the implementation of the framework. I mean, they're the big things that I can do, is to make sure that that this stays on track, that we keep delivering when we say we're going to deliver, and hold people to account when they don't deliver. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, the assurance piece in this is probably the enduring legacy piece, because we've never really had an assurance regime that has focused on child safety, and this very much is all about the child safety.
And this has arisen because of your involvement in Case Study 40?
It has been considerably sharpened and enhanced as a result of Case Study 40, there's no doubt about that.
What measures are you going to put in place to look at whether or not you've achieved what you're setting out to achieve?
Well, I think this comes back to the youth safety standards and the maturity model, and using the assurance process to see where we actually are across the organisation. That's the primary vehicle for us to see what is happening at the coalface, because it's all very well to have the policy in the headquarters, to have a nice looking youth poll man, but if it's not actually translating at the coalface. That's the feedback loop that we've never really had before. In an independent way, outside the unit, someone coming in and looking at the unit saying, well, this unit does not understand this or is not practising that. And that's really the crux of it going forward for me.
So how will the youth safety maturity model work when it's in place?
So what it does is provides the if you like, the assessment piece. So the standards are what you're going to assess against. The maturity model tells you on the where you are on the journey towards a best practice mature youth safety organisation. So it'll be tracking the progress we make, presumably up the model, because let's be realistic about where we'll start. We won't be starting at the right hand end of the maturity model. We'll be well down in some places to the left. Some units will be very good, some will be not so good, and that's the reality of what we're going to experience over the next 12 to 18 months as we take the organisation forward.
So, as we understand this, what's shaded grey has been completed, and then there's two shades of purple. The first one, that is the darker one, completed foundation deliverables with ongoing work in progress. What does that mean?
That means that it's either largely complete or key elements of it are complete, but there is ongoing work to finish off the whole package.
Now, you've obviously set these timeframes yourself, is that right?
I have had people propose timeframes and I have modified the timeframes in certain circumstances.
To reduce them, or?
To reduce them generally.
How confident are you that you'll meet these timeframes?
I think I am now quite confident that we will hit these targets. A few months ago I was less confident, but I am increasingly confident.
Is there any body, such as the body you've described, that agreed ultimately with your approach to which you have to account for how you have progressed it?
As a result of the changes to the Defence Act on the 1st of July of last year, we now have to do an annual report on cadet matters to government, which will go through the Chiefs of Service Committee each year. That will be the vehicle we will use to report on our progress.
And do you understand that annual report will be made public?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. You have nothing further?
I think Commissioner Atkinson has some questions.
I did, thank you. Vice Admiral, just following up from some of the matters that Councillor Assisting asked, at point 35 or paragraph 35 of your statement, you mentioned 4 interwoven streams of work, which are culture, governance, training and assurance. And in terms of Council's Assistant's question about measures, is evaluation in the assurance part, it's the 4 streams, and of course assurance is the 6th part of the Defence Youth Safety Framework that was up on the screens earlier.
Yes, Commissioner.
So evaluation is?
Yes.
Okay. How many cadets are there throughout Australia?
There's 23,500.
Yes. And have you had a chance to turn your mind, or the people who work for you in this space, as to what either quantitative or qualitative performance indicators might look like in terms of evaluation?
Well, this is where the maturity model is the basis of our assurance and evaluation process.
So what performance indicators, either quantitative or qualitative, would be involved in terms of the maturity model?
I'll just try and find the model if I could, Commissioner.
This is not, we asked this question of other organisations as well, and I take it that the assurance is essentially as wanting to know that what you are doing is working?
That's correct.
Okay. But it sounds as though perhaps that the performance indicators have not been developed yet.
No, I think, well, I just can't find the model, but I will tender it so you can examine that.
That would be helpful, thank you. And by way of indication, of the 23,000 cadets, do we know in the 2016 calendar year how many of those cadets who were under 18 years of age, for example, made any form of complaint against someone who was over 18 years of age within the ADF?
I can give you some statistics from the last case study to February this year, where there were 13 complaints of various nature. Not all of them were adult cadet, some of them were cadet. All except one of those have been referred to the police, and the one that was not referred was at the parents of the cadets' instructions.
Well, thank you. And as I understand it, you'll provide what information is available in terms of performance indicators to the Royal Commission. Thank you.
Ms McLeod?
No questions.
I note we haven't got that maturity model as you've described it, so perhaps if it can be provided.
We'll certainly do that.
Thank you. Your Honour, nothing further.
Thank you, Vice Admiral. That concludes your evidence again. And again, you're excused.
Thank you
for your contribution.
Tomorrow at 10 a.m, Your Honour.
We'll adjourn until 10.